The smell of sugar and vanilla filled the air as I stood frozen in the lobby clutching the white box so tight the cardboard started to cave in. The receptionist's words echoed in my head like a cruel joke on repeat. "Oh, you must be his sister. His wife just stopped by with flowers." My mouth went dry. My throat burned. I wanted to correct her to say I'm his wife. But the words wouldn't come out. My hands began to shake. The cake trembled, and for a moment I thought I might drop it right there on the marble floor. The world around me blurred phones, ringing keyboards, clicking polite office laughter while my entire life cracked in silence. That morning had started like any other birthday of his early sunlight filtering through the curtains, coffee brewing, my hands dusted in flour. I'd been up since dawn, humming along to an old country station as I mixed his favorite cake batter chocolate with a hint of espresso. He loved it that way, said it made him feel awake just smelling it. I remember smiling as I spread the frosting, picturing his face lighting up when he saw me walk through his office doors. It had been years since I'd surprised him. Work had made him distant, and I thought foolishly that maybe this little gesture could bridge that quiet space that had grown between us. The house smelled like warmth and memories, the kind of scent that makes you think love still lives there. I even wrapped a small gift, a watch I couldn't really afford, and wrote a note that said, "To the man who still makes my heart race. Happy birthday." When I left home, I felt light, proud, hopeful. The sun was shining, the sky wide and forgiving. I remember thinking, this is how marriages survive small acts of love, quiet surprises, simple faith. His office was downtown, a tall glass building that always felt too sleek for someone like me, the wife who still shopped with coupons and wore cardigans older than her grown kids. I parked 2 blocks away and walked carefully, balancing the cake box like it was made of gold. Inside, the air smelled of perfume and printer ink. Everyone looked too busy to notice me standing at the front desk, except for the receptionist, young, polished, the kind of woman who probably wore heels to bed. She gave me a bright, professional smile. "Hi there, can I help you?" "Yes," I said, trying not to sound nervous. "I'm here to surprise my husband. It's his birthday. He works here, Thomas Baker." She blinked, smiled wider, too wide, and said the sentence that ripped the air out of my lungs. "Oh, you must be his sister. His wife just stopped by with flowers. She was just here, such a lovely woman." For a moment I thought I'd misheard. "His wife," I repeated softly. "Yes," she said, checking her notes without realizing what she'd just done. "She left maybe 15 minutes ago." Something hot and cold rushed through my body all at once. "Do you—" I tried to form words. "Do you know her name?" The receptionist hesitated. "I'm sorry, I'm not really supposed to give out personal details." Her tone shifted, that professional unease people get when they sense they've stepped into something wrong. But by then, I wasn't listening. I could barely feel my feet on the floor. I walked back to my car like someone else was moving my body for me. The box felt heavier with every step. By the time I got inside, I set it on the passenger seat and just stared at it. The frosting had smudged against the lid, leaving a chocolate smear that looked almost like a wound. I thought about driving back home, pretending it never happened, pretending maybe she was wrong. Maybe wife was just a mistake, a slip of the tongue. Maybe he'd sent someone to pick up flowers for me. That's what I told myself, over and over. But the truth had already started whispering, and once truth begins to whisper, it doesn't stop. I sat there for almost an hour watching office workers come and go, men in shirt sleeves, women in pencil skirts, people living lives that weren't falling apart. At some point, I looked at the cake again and laughed, a small, cracked laugh that scared me. It wasn't funny, not really, but somehow laughter was easier than screaming. When the clock on my dashboard hit noon, I realized I couldn't go home yet. I wasn't ready to face the silence of our house where every framed photo would suddenly look like a lie. So I drove. No destination, just roads and sunlight and questions. When I finally got back, the cake was still untouched. I carried it inside and placed it on the kitchen counter. The house smelled like cinnamon and betrayal. I sat down at the table, staring at the frosting until it blurred. My hands still shook. I remembered all the birthdays before the ones where we'd dance in the kitchen laughing at old songs, making wishes we thought would last forever. Now I couldn't even remember the last time he'd looked at me the way he used to. The refrigerator hummed softly. A clock ticked. My wedding ring felt heavier than it ever had before. And somewhere in the back of my mind a voice whispered, "You already know. You just don't want to believe it." That night he came home with a bouquet, lilies my favorite. He kissed me on the cheek, said, "You didn't have to make such a big fuss." I smiled, said nothing. Watched him set the flowers down beside the cake I'd baked, the one he never even asked about. He didn't notice the way my hands trembled when I poured his coffee. He didn't notice the silence between every word. But I noticed everything. The faint trace of unfamiliar perfume clinging to his jacket, the lipstick stain not mine on the inside of his collar, and the way he looked away when I said softly, "Happy birthday, Tom." That night, I lay awake beside him, listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing, wondering how long he'd been lying, and how long I'd been pretending not to see it. I woke up before the alarm the next morning, but I didn't move. The early light filtered through the curtains, painting pale lines across the wall. Tom was still asleep beside me, turned to the other side, breathing evenly, like nothing in the world was wrong. For a moment, I almost believed it too. Maybe yesterday had been some kind of misunderstanding. Maybe the receptionist had confused me with someone else. Maybe the wife she mentioned was just a client being friendly. I repeated those maybes in my head like a prayer I didn't believe in. When he stirred, I pretended to sleep. I listened to him shower, hum a tune, pour coffee, grab his keys. He didn't kiss me goodbye. The front door clicked shut, and I opened my eyes. The smell of the leftover cake filled the kitchen when I walked in. It sat there on the counter, still covered, the frosting slightly cracked. I ran my finger along the lid, cold now, and thought about throwing it away. But I couldn't. Not yet. It felt like evidence of something I wasn't ready to face. The first half of that week was ordinary in a cruel kind of way. He called when he said he would. He came home at the usual time. We ate dinner together, pasta, then soup, then leftovers. I kept waiting for some sign that would confirm what I'd heard or maybe erase it. But he was perfectly normal. Too normal. When you live with someone for nearly 30 years, you learn the shape of their habits, like your own heartbeat. You can sense a change before they say a word. That week, his smile was just a little too timed, his jokes too practiced. He looked at me, but not into me. I tried to convince myself I was overreacting. My sister Linda called that Wednesday night, just her usual check-in, and asked how we were. "Fine," I said, forcing cheer into my voice. "He's busy with work. You know how it goes." She laughed. "You've been saying that for 10 years, hon. You ever think about a vacation?" A vacation. The last one we took together, our youngest was still in high school. We'd gone to the Smoky Mountains. He'd spent most of the trip answering work emails while I read books on the porch. Somehow, even that memory felt like a luxury now. Thursday evening, he came home late, said there was a client dinner. He smelled faintly of wine and cologne that wasn't his usual brand. When I asked if everything was okay at work, he brushed it off. "Just busy," he said, loosening his tie. "Lots of late nights this quarter." I nodded. "You've been working hard." He smiled, tired. "You sound like my accountant." It was an easy exchange, familiar, safe. But under the table, my fingers twisted together. That night when he went to shower, I checked his jacket pocket, something I'd never done in my life. My hands were shaking the entire time. There was nothing, no receipts, no notes, nothing incriminating. But the absence felt louder than any proof. By Friday, I couldn't take the tension anymore. I found myself driving past his office around noon. I told myself it was coincidence, I was just in the area. The receptionist wasn't there this time, and I didn't go in. I just parked across the street and watched. Cars came and went. People in suits walked briskly, coffee cups in hand. And then I saw him stepping out with a woman. Younger than me, stylish, the kind of woman who knows her own reflection too well. She laughed at something he said, touched his arm. He didn't pull away. They stood close for a moment before walking off toward the cafe on the corner. I stayed in the car. my breath shallow hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles went white. I didn't take a picture. I didn't confront him. I just sat there until they disappeared around the corner. When I finally started the engine, I whispered, "Maybe it's work," but my own voice sounded like a stranger's lie. That night I barely touched dinner. He noticed. "Everything okay?" he asked. "I'm just tired," I said. He reached across the table, covering my hand with his. "You've been quiet lately. You sure you're not coming down with something?" I smiled. "Maybe." He gave me that old, concerned look, the one that used to make me feel loved. But now it only confused me more. Was he pretending? Or was I losing my mind? After he went to bed, I sat at the kitchen table in the dark, the refrigerator humming behind me. I thought about every year we'd spent together, the bills paid, the children raised, the nights shared. How could someone who shared my every memory build another life without me noticing? I wanted to hate him, but mostly I hated myself for not seeing it sooner. On Saturday morning, I woke up early again. The house was quiet except for the ticking clock in the hallway. I poured myself coffee, sat at the window, and stared at the backyard, the rose bushes he'd planted for our anniversary, the shed he built one summer when money was tight. Everything looked so ordinary, so honest. But even ordinary things can lie. I picked up my wedding photo from the shelf. My hair was darker than his smile, wider. We looked like two people who believed forever was a promise, not a gamble. I ran my thumb across the glass, tracing the line of his jaw, and felt something inside me harden. Denial had kept me safe for a week, but safety was starting to feel like a trap. That afternoon, I cleaned the kitchen not because it needed it, but because I needed something to control. I wiped the counters until my reflection looked back at me in the marble. And for the first time in years, I really looked at myself. The lines near my mouth, the tiredness in my eyes, the quiet strength I'd mistaken for weakness. I whispered, "You deserve the truth." It wasn't loud, it wasn't brave, but it was a start. That evening, he came home early with takeout. "Thought we could have a little movie night," he said cheerfully. "Just us." I nodded, smiled, sat beside him on the couch while a comedy played on TV. We laughed in all the right places, but every sound felt hollow. When he reached for my hand, I didn't pull away, but inside I knew something had changed. He still didn't know that a stranger's sentence his wife just left had split our world in two. And while he laughed at the screen, I was already planning my next move. It's strange how silence can be louder than words. After that night, everything in our home sounded different. The scrape of a chair, the hum of the fridge, the soft thud of his shoes by the door. I began noticing every small inconsistency like clues in a mystery only I cared about solving. He had always been predictable, a man of habits. Morning coffee at 7:15, work tie navy or gray, calls at noon, dinner at 6:30, bed by 10. But suddenly, the pattern started to shift. On Monday, he left early. On Tuesday, he forgot his lunch. By Wednesday, he came home with a new aftershave, something musky younger. I asked lightly, "New cologne?" He smiled without looking at me. "Oh, the store must have given me a free sample." "Smells different," I said. "You don't like it? It's fine." It wasn't fine. Nothing was. At first, I told myself to stop overanalyzing. I'd raised 2 kids, balanced checkbooks, managed a home through hard times. Surely I could manage my own imagination. But once suspicion plants a seed, it grows wild, twisting around every thought, choking logic until all that's left is doubt. That night, I went to his study while he showered. It still smelled faintly of tobacco and printer ink. His desk was neat, his laptop closed, his phone charging beside it. I wasn't the type to snoop, I never had been. But I couldn't stop my hand from reaching for the phone. Locked, of course. He'd started using a passcode last year, said it was for work privacy. Back then, I didn't question it. Now it felt like a wall I'd helped him build. A few days later, I met my friend Carol for lunch. She'd been widowed 5 years earlier, but still carried herself with the kind of calm wisdom you only earn through pain. We sat at a small diner, the kind that still served coffee in chipped mugs. "You look tired," she said, stirring sugar into her cup. Everything okay at home? I hesitated. Then for the first time I said it out loud. I think Tom's seeing someone. Carol's spoon stopped mid-stir. What makes you think that? I told her everything, the receptionist, the perfume, the changed habits. She listened quietly, her brow furrowed. Have you asked him? No, I admitted. I'm afraid of the answer. She sighed. Honey, the not knowing will kill you faster than the truth. I looked down at my sandwich, untouched. What if I'm wrong? What if I ruin everything for nothing? And what if you're right, she said gently, and you keep living like you don't know? Her words stayed with me long after lunch ended. That evening, I decided to test him not out of revenge, but out of self-preservation. I cooked his favorite dinner, roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans sautéed in butter. The house smelled like comfort, like marriage, like all the years we'd built together. When he came home, he smiled genuinely, it seemed. What's the occasion? Just missed you, I said softly. He kissed my forehead, and for a moment I felt the warmth I'd been craving. Maybe I had imagined it all. Maybe love could still be simple. But after dinner, he got a text. His phone buzzed twice on the counter. He glanced at it, smiled faintly, then flipped it over, screen down. Work, I asked. He hesitated just a second too long. Yeah, client thing. I nodded. You work too hard, Tom. He laughed. You worry too much. But when he left the table to take a call in the garage, I knew without needing proof that this wasn't work. I followed him quietly to the hallway, listening. His voice was low, soft, the tone he used only when he wanted something flirty, measured, careful. No, she doesn't suspect anything, he said, his words a knife. A pause, then laughter, his real laugh, the one I hadn't heard in months. I'll see you tomorrow, same place. Yeah, can't wait. My knees nearly gave out. I pressed my back against the wall, covering my mouth to keep from gasping. When he hung up, I scrambled back to the kitchen, pretending to dry dishes. He came in moments later, cheerful, relaxed, oblivious. Sorry about that, he said. Client's a handful. I managed a smile. Everything okay? Just business, he said, kissing my cheek. Always business. And maybe that was true in a way, because love, I was starting to realize, had become its own kind of transaction in our house. That night when he slept, I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the darkness. I could hear the distant hum of passing cars, the rhythmic sound of his breathing. My reflection in the window looked pale, ghost-like. There's a kind of grief that doesn't come from death, but from the slow, quiet realization that something you loved has already died. I whispered, When did we stop being us? He stirred slightly but didn't wake. I wanted him to. I wanted him to roll over, touch my hand, and make it all untrue. But he didn't. The next morning I found a receipt in the pocket of his slacks while folding laundry. It was from a hotel, not one in our town, but a small inn 40 minutes away. 2 guests. Dinner for 2. A date just 3 days prior. The floor seemed to tilt beneath me. I stared at the receipt so long the ink blurred. He came into the room just then, smiling, coffee in hand. You've been up early lately, he said. I forced a smile, tucking the paper into my pocket. Couldn't sleep. He kissed the top of my head and left for work. The moment the door shut, I sat on the bed and unfolded the receipt again. My hands were shaking. The proof I'd both feared and expected was right there, small and cruel in its simplicity. He wasn't just lying, he was living a whole other truth. That evening, I didn't confront him, not yet. Instead, I baked another cake. The same one as before, chocolate with espresso. I wanted to see if he'd notice, if he'd taste the guilt in it. When he came home, I greeted him with a calmness that wasn't real. Happy Friday, I said. He smiled, that same practiced smile. Smells amazing. You spoil me. I watched him take a bite, savor it, laugh. Even better than last time, he said. And that's when I realized he didn't even remember the first one, the cake I'd brought to his office, the day the receptionist thought I was his sister. The day everything started to crumble. The next morning I woke up knowing something had shifted inside me. The fear that had kept me silent for weeks had burned itself out, leaving only a quiet determination in its place. It wasn't rage exactly. It was colder than that, steady, deliberate, like the way a person moves when they're about to clean up a mess that's gone on too long. Tom left early saying he had a meeting out of town. I watched him through the window as he backed out of the driveway, one hand on the wheel phone tucked under his chin. The car disappeared down the street and I sat at the kitchen table with my coffee staring at the empty chair across from me. I used to imagine that chair as the symbol of partnership, morning talks, shared plans, laughter over burnt toast. Now it felt like a witness stand. Around mid-morning, I called the hotel listed on the receipt I'd found. My heart thudded like a drum while the phone rang. "Good morning, Garden View Inn," a woman's voice answered cheerfully. "Yes, hi," I said, trying to sound casual. "I think there's been a mistake with my husband's expense report. Could you confirm if a reservation under the name Thomas Baker was made earlier this week?" A pause. The faint sound of typing. Then, "Yes, Mrs. Baker, 2 nights, suite number 12. Checked in Tuesday evening." 2 nights. I swallowed hard. "Right, thank you. And could you tell me who the second guest was listed as it might have been under a company account?" "I'm sorry, ma'am," she said gently. "I can't disclose that information." Of course she couldn't. But she didn't have to. The silence between her words told me everything. That afternoon, I gathered what I had: the hotel receipt, a printout of his credit card charges, a few screenshots of texts I'd seen light up his phone when he wasn't looking. One of them had said, "Can't wait to see you again. Same place." I sat at the kitchen table, arranging them neatly in a folder. The sound of the paper sliding against the wood was strangely satisfying. When you've spent years doubting yourself, physical evidence feels like oxygen. I thought about calling him out over the phone, catching him mid-lie. But no. After nearly 3 decades of marriage, he deserved to look me in the eye when the truth arrived. He came home later than usual that night. I'd left the lights on low, the house quiet, except for the faint hum of the dishwasher. I was sitting at the table, the folder in front of me, untouched dinner growing cold. "Hey," he said lightly, hanging up his jacket. "You're up late." "I needed to talk to you," I said, my voice even. He paused, sensing something. "What's wrong?" I gestured to the chair across from me. "Sit." He hesitated. "Martha, you're scaring me." "Good," I said softly. "At least now you know how I've felt for weeks." He sat down slowly, eyes narrowing. "What is this about?" I opened the folder and slid the first page across the table, the hotel receipt. "You want to explain this?" His face didn't change at first. Then a flash of something: surprise, then calculation. "Where did you get that?" "In your pocket," I said. "Next to your car keys." He leaned back, forcing a laugh. "Martha, come on, that's not what it looks like." "Then tell me what it looks like," I said, my tone steady. He rubbed his temples, sighing heavily. "It was a business trip. A client dinner ran late. I didn't want to drive home that night." 2 nights, I corrected. He blinked. "What?" "The receipt says 2 nights, Tom." His lips pressed together. "You're overreacting. You've always had this thing where you worry about everything. Gaslighting, the oldest trick in the book. And once it might have worked, but not tonight." I reached into the folder again and placed the credit card printout on the table. "You bought perfume," I said quietly, "at a store I've never been to. You also had dinner for 2 at a place called the Birch Room. And there's this." I slid the phone screenshot across. "A text from someone who can't wait to see you again." He looked at it, eyes flicking across the screen, jaw tightening. Then, like a man rehearsed in the art of lying, he shook his head. "That's a coworker. You're taking this out of context." "Then explain the context," I said. "Explain why your coworker was pretending to be your wife at the office." That one hit. He froze, eyes darting toward me. "What are you talking about?" "The receptionist called her your wife," I said. "She said she stopped by with flowers on your birthday." He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Just a faint exhale, like air leaking from a tire. The silence stretched. Finally, he stood up, pacing. "Martha, I don't know what you want me to say." The truth would be a nice start. He turned toward me, frustration rising. "You're twisting things, making me the bad guy. Do you have any idea the pressure I'm under? The stress? You think I wanted this?" I laughed, not bitterly, just tired. Wanted what? Tom to be caught. He looked away, jaw clenched. "I gave you 30 years, I said, my voice shaking now. 30 years of dinners, bills, holidays, sick days, funerals, and you gave me a stranger's perfume on your shirt. He ran a hand through his hair. It wasn't supposed to mean anything. Then why does it mean everything to me? He didn't answer. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the ticking clock above the stove. When he finally spoke, his voice was small. I didn't want to hurt you. Then you shouldn't have lied, I said. He sighed, defeated. It just happened, Martha. We were friends. It got complicated. I didn't know how to stop. Stop, I interrupted. You didn't even try. He looked at me, eyes glistening. Can we work this out? I'll end it, I promise. I met his gaze, calm now. It's already ended. He blinked. What? I'm done being the only one fighting for us, I said quietly. You made your choice. Now I'm making mine. He reached for my hand, but I pulled it back. For the first time in years, I saw him clearly, not as my husband, not as the man I once trusted with my whole heart, but as a person who'd broken something he could never repair. I stood up, gathered the folder, and walked toward the doorway. Before I left, I said the only thing that felt true. I don't want your apology, Tom. I want my peace. And then I left him sitting there alone, surrounded by the evidence of what he'd destroyed. I didn't sleep that night. I lay on my side of the bed, staring at the faint glow of the alarm clock, while Tom's breathing rose and fell in uneven waves beside me. He had come upstairs an hour after our confrontation, saying nothing, slipping under the covers like a man trying to hide from his own shadow. I wanted to scream, to demand answers he hadn't given. But exhaustion had settled deep into my bones, not the kind that comes from lack of rest, but from years of trying to keep something alive that was already gone. At 5 a.m., I quietly got out of bed, packed a small bag, and left the house before the sun came up. I drove without music, just the sound of the road and my heartbeat. The morning sky was pale and heavy, the kind that feels like it's holding its breath. I ended up at my sister Linda's house 20 miles away, where the coffee was always strong and the welcome was wordless. She opened the door in her robe, eyes widening when she saw me standing there with an overnight bag. Martha, I just need a place to think, I said. She stepped aside immediately. Come in. Inside, her kitchen smelled like cinnamon and home. She poured coffee, set it on the counter, and waited. I stared into the cup for a long time before whispering, "He cheated." Linda reached across the counter, her hand warm on mine. Oh, honey. I felt tears sting but didn't let them fall. I knew it before I knew it, like when you smell rain before the storm hits. She nodded slowly. You don't have to explain, just breathe. So I did. For the first time in weeks, I actually breathed. The next few days blurred together. I stayed in her guest room, surrounded by quiet. I'd wake to the sound of birds and the smell of coffee and think, this is what peace feels like. Tom called, of course. The first message was pleading. Martha, please, we can talk about this. Then apologetic. I made a mistake. I'm so sorry. I love you. Come home. By the third voicemail, his tone changed, frustration bleeding through. You can't just walk out like this. We have a life, responsibilities. I stopped listening after that. Each message sounded smaller, less like remorse, and more like control slipping through his fingers. Linda convinced me to go for walks in the afternoons. We strolled through her neighborhood where the trees arched overhead like a canopy. She didn't push for details. She didn't need to. Sometimes silence is the only language pain understands. One evening, we sat on her porch swing watching the sun dip below the trees. The cicadas hummed their endless song. What are you going to do now? She asked gently. I don't know, I said. Everything feels empty, like I've been living someone else's life. She nodded. That's because you've been living for him. It's time to start living for you. The simplicity of it hit me harder than any argument ever could. A few days later, I went back home. The house was quiet, too clean. He wasn't there, left a note saying he was staying with a friend to give me space. I walked through each room, slowly touching the edges of furniture, the backs of chairs, the kitchen counter where we used to laugh while cooking dinner. Everything looked familiar, yet strange, like a museum of a life that no longer belonged to me. In the kitchen, the cake plate still sat on the counter. Empty now, crumbs dried and hard. I lifted the lid, stared for a long moment, then carried it outside to the trash bin. The sound of the lid closing was sharper than I expected. Final. That night, I sat in the living room with a notebook and wrote down everything I'd been avoiding. He lied. He cheated. I'm not crazy. I deserve peace. Each word felt like a brick in a new foundation. The following week, I met with a therapist for the first time in my life. She was kind, patient, the kind of woman who listened more with her eyes than her mouth. I told her the whole story, the receptionist, the receipt, the confrontation. When I finished, she leaned forward and asked, "What do you want, Martha?" Not what he wants or what others expect. What you want. It was the hardest question anyone had asked me. "I want my life back," I said finally, "the part that's still mine." She smiled. "Then that's where we'll start." Days turned into weeks. Tom texted occasionally, but I didn't reply. Instead, I started rediscovering the things I'd put away long ago: my sewing machine, the old guitar gathering dust in the attic, my garden gloves. I spent afternoons outside planting marigolds and tomatoes, letting the dirt fill the spaces that used to ache. There's something healing about growing things. You dig plant water and wait, and somehow in that waiting life begins again. One evening, I found myself baking, not for him, not out of habit, but because I wanted to. The same chocolate cake, the same scent filling the house, but this time it didn't carry weight. It was light like forgiveness rising in the oven. I sliced a piece, sat by the window, and whispered, "You made it, Martha." For the first time in months, I smiled without forcing it. When Tom showed up 2 days later, I wasn't surprised. He looked older, tired, unshaven, guilt written across his face. "I've missed you," he said, standing awkwardly in the doorway. "I've been thinking maybe we can try again." I looked at him for a long time. The man I'd loved was still there somewhere beneath the lies, but love built on betrayal doesn't grow back the same way. "Tom," I said quietly, "I don't hate you, but I can't keep loving someone who treated me like a placeholder." He swallowed hard. "So that's it." I nodded. "That's it." He didn't argue. Maybe he knew he'd already lost more than just a marriage. When he left, I closed the door behind him, not with anger, but with grace. And for the first time in years, the silence that followed didn't scare me. It felt like freedom. That night, I took off my wedding ring, set it gently on the counter beside the empty cake plate. I thought I'd cry, but I didn't. Instead, I whispered to the quiet room, "I'm still here." And for the first time, that was enough. I woke up the next morning to sunlight pouring through the curtains, bright, uninvited, unapologetic. For years, I had started my days by checking where Tom was listening for the shower or the jangle of his keys. That morning, I only listened to my own breath. It was steady, sure, and for once mine alone. The air in the house felt different now, still haunted but no longer suffocating. I poured myself coffee, sat by the window, and opened my notebook, the one where I had written my truths. I turned to a fresh page and wrote 2 new words. Next steps. The first step was practical. I called a lawyer. Her name was Margaret, a friend of a friend. She spoke with the calm precision of someone who had walked 100 women through the same kind of storm. Her office was filled with neat stacks of papers and the faint scent of peppermint tea. When I told her what had happened, she didn't flinch. "You've already done the hardest part," she said. "You saw the truth." I nodded. "I just don't know where to start." "Start with protecting yourself," she said, pulling out a notepad. "Financial accounts, property documents, and Martha." She looked at me over her glasses. "Don't let guilt make you generous." Her words sank deep. For 30 years, generosity had been my default. I'd given time, energy, forgiveness, always more than I should. This time, I'd give nothing away that wasn't earned. That afternoon, I went to the bank. The same bank where Tom and I had opened our first joint account after the wedding. The clerk, a young woman with kind eyes, recognized my last name. "How can I help you, Mrs. Baker?" "I need to open a new account," I said, "in my name only." As she typed, I stared at the logo on the counter, the same blue lettering I'd stared at so many times while we'd sat there together signing mortgages and saving plans. It struck me then how much of my identity had been attached to the word we. When I walked out of that bank with a new debit card in my wallet, I felt like I'd taken my first real breath in years. The second step was emotional. I started therapy twice a week. The sessions were draining like surgery on a wound that had been festering too long but necessary. My therapist, Ruth, encouraged me to write letters, ones I'd never send. One was to Tom. It began, "You didn't just lie to me. You lied to the woman who would have forgiven you if you'd told the truth." Another was to myself. "You are not broken. You were just too loyal to someone who stopped deserving it." I wrote until my hand cramped, until my tears blurred the ink. And when I was done, I burned them in the fireplace, not out of anger, but as an offering to the part of me that still believed healing required permission. Tom tried reaching out again. Emails, texts, a few unannounced visits. I never yelled. I never argued. I simply said, "I've spoken with my lawyer," and watched the fight leave his face. He sent one last email a week later. "I didn't mean for things to end like this. I hope someday you can forgive me." I didn't reply. Forgiveness, I realized, wasn't a gift I owed him. It was something I owed myself, and I wasn't ready yet. A month passed. Then two. I filled my days with quiet victories, repainting the living room, joining a book club, cooking meals that didn't have to please anyone but me. The loneliness didn't vanish overnight, but it softened. Some nights I even caught myself humming while washing dishes. One Saturday morning while tending my garden, a neighbor stopped by. "You've been out here every day," she said with a smile. "Those roses look amazing." I looked at them, blooming bright against the fence, petals open wide, and smiled back. "They had to be cut back first," I said. "That's how they grow stronger." She didn't know I was talking about more than flowers. Then came the letter, a formal envelope from Margaret's office. The divorce papers. Clean, professional, final. I sat at my desk with a pen in hand, the weight of 3 decades pressing down on my chest. My hand trembled for only a second before I signed my name. When I slid the papers back into the envelope, I didn't cry. I expected I would, but instead, there was only calm, a quiet certainty that I'd finally stepped out of the wreckage and back onto solid ground. A week later, I saw her for the first time, the woman from the office from the hotel. We crossed paths at the grocery store. She froze when she recognized me, her cart half filled with flowers and wine. I could see panic flash across her face. She opened her mouth as if to speak, but I beat her to it. "Don't worry," I said softly. "You don't owe me an apology. He does." Her eyes widened. I didn't mean—" "I know," I interrupted gently. "Neither did I. But we both did it anyway. We both believed him." She nodded, eyes glistening, and walked away. As I turned down the next aisle, I felt something shift. The bitterness that had clung to me like smoke began to fade. Not forgiveness, just release. Later that evening, I found myself at the kitchen table again, the same spot where I'd confronted Tom months before. The same table that once felt like a battlefield now felt like sacred ground. I lit a candle, poured myself tea, and whispered a simple prayer. "Thank you for the strength to let go." The house was quiet, but it no longer felt empty. The walls, the furniture, the silence, they all belonged to me now. Every inch of space reclaimed was a victory. Before heading to bed, I wrote one last note in my notebook under next steps. Learn to love peace more than people who destroy it. Remember, freedom isn't loneliness, it's honesty. Never again bake a cake for someone who forgets what sweetness means. I closed the notebook and smiled. The reckoning was done. The rebuilding had begun. A year later, I woke up to the same date on the calendar, March 18th. His birthday. For a moment, I stared at it, waiting for the ache to return. But it didn't. Instead, there was a strange calmness, the kind that comes when a wound has fully scarred over. The kind of peace you don't even realize you've been chasing until you finally have it. Outside, the morning light slanted through the blinds, painting gold stripes across the kitchen floor. I poured my coffee, leaned against the counter, and let the warmth fill my hands. There was no rush, no noise, no one calling my name from upstairs. Just stillness. And then, almost without thinking, I opened the pantry and reached for the flour. The smell of cocoa filled the kitchen rich and familiar. It had been exactly a year since I'd last baked that cake, the one I'd carried into his office like a fool clutching hope in a cardboard box. But this time it wasn't for him, this time it was for me. I sifted the flour slowly, deliberately. The rhythm soothed me. Sugar, eggs, butter, all the same ingredients, but they meant something different now. They weren't symbols of devotion anymore. They were ingredients of reclamation. As the batter came together, I remembered every moment of the past year, the nights of silence, the therapy sessions, the first time I laughed again without guilt. Each step, stirring, folding, pouring, felt like a page turning in a story I was finally writing for myself. While the cake baked, I sat by the window and looked out at my garden. The roses were back in bloom, brighter than ever, pushing through the soil like they had something to prove. I thought about how I used to wait for him to notice them, how I used to wait for him to notice me. But now I noticed myself, and that was enough. The timer dinged, and I took the cake out of the oven. It rose beautifully, perfectly even. I let it cool, then spread the frosting with slow, steady strokes, the same way I had a year ago, except now my hands didn't shake. They were steady, confident, sure. On top I wrote with white icing for me. Later that afternoon, I set the table with one plate, one fork, one slice. The air smelled of chocolate and new beginnings. I poured a cup of tea and sat down. "Happy birthday?" I whispered, not to him, but to the woman who'd survived loving him. I took a bite of the cake, soft and rich, and laughed quietly. It was sweet, sweeter than I remembered. Maybe freedom had a flavor after all. I thought back to that day in the office, the receptionist's bright smile, her words like a blade wrapped in sugar. His wife just left. If I could go back to that moment, I wouldn't run away. I'd smile right back and say, "That's funny, so did I." As the sun began to set, I took a walk down the quiet street. The spring air was cool, the kind that carries both memory and promise. A few neighbors waved. I waved back, feeling lighter than I had in years. There was no trace of bitterness anymore. Just gratitude, not for what happened, but for what it taught me. Because sometimes the worst kind of heartbreak is also the beginning of the truest kind of freedom. I had lost a husband, yes, but I had found myself. And she was worth finding. That evening, I sat on the porch with my journal, the same one that had once been filled with pain and lists of survival. I turned to the last page and wrote, "1 year later, I still live in the same house. I still bake the same cake. But I'm not the same woman. I don't wait for someone to come home. I am home. I don't need to be called wife to know my worth. I earned it one scar at a time." I closed the journal and felt something like peace settle in my chest. It wasn't loud or dramatic, just a quiet, steady heartbeat that said, "You made it." As night fell, I lit a candle on the table beside the finished cake. The flame flickered golden and soft. I whispered to the empty room, "You did good, Martha." And for the first time, I believed it. If you're listening to this, if you've ever found yourself holding on to something that no longer loves you back, I want you to know this. You can start again. You can walk away. You can rebuild from the ashes without needing to set the world on fire first. Because healing doesn't always look like revenge. Sometimes it looks like baking a cake for yourself and meaning it. So here's my question for you. What would your for me cake look like? What small thing could you do today that reminds you you're still here, still capable of joy, of sweetness, of beginning again? Take your time, you'll get there. And when you do, light a candle, take a bite, and whisper to yourself, "Happy birthday to the life I almost forgot I could live."